that Australian researchers have some unique advantages. We collaborate across boundaries, but we also compete hard. We're down to earth, we judge by results, and we believe in what's real. Our distaste for authority means that we think for ourselves. And best of all, we're prepared to give those hard challenges a go. And I firmly believe that there's nowhere else in the world better to do scientific research.
How do we get back? How do we get back? How do we get back? Yes, it never-
Hello, my name is Jan Wisniewski and this is The Strife, a podcast to discuss issues in Australia with the long term in mind. Quiz time. Since 1960, when the award was first handed out, how many Australians of the year have been scientists? 16 is the answer. Not bad. Australia has good scientists. But, as argued by our guest for this episode, Kylie Walker, CEO of Science and Technology Australia, or STA, more Australians could be doing science, and we could be doing more to support them. Kylie is currently spearheading STA's work to promote the value of STEM, that is, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So keep listening as Kylie explains how Australia shapes up as a STEM nation and how we can make the most of the opportunities this country presents us. Thank you, Kylie, for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Jan.
Okay, I'll jump into my first question. Science and Technology Australia's stated mission is to bring together scientists, governments, industry, and the broader community to advance the role, reputation, and impact of science and technology in Australia. Is this role and reputation currently under threat?
It's a very interesting question, Jan. It is and it isn't. Like many things, there's no black and white answer to this. It is under threat in that there is short-term resourcing. There are challenges at the moment for STEM education. We have a less diverse workforce than is desirable. There is declining investment in science by both government and to some extent by the private sector. And there's an ongoing instability and job insecurity in the sector. So these things are threats to the role and the reputation of science. On the other hand, there are some causes for optimism, and on the reputation side in particular, Science and Technology Australia held a national poll recently that found that 94% of Australians acknowledge that Australian science is important to their health and well-being, and nearly 80% suggest that government investment in science should be increased. So we see that as a very strong community support for a stronger sector going forward.
Okay. Last year, the Australian government tasked Innovation and Science Australia with developing a 2030 strategic plan for the Australian Innovation, Science and Research System, which would describe what Australia's innovation system should look like in 2030. In the STA submission to the 2030 strategic plan, you noted the urgent need to foster a richly diverse STEM workforce. What does that workforce look like right now, and how would more diversity lead to a stronger sector?
The STEM qualified workforce in Australia represents around 2.3 million people. So around 10% of Australians have some qualification in science, technology, engineering and maths, either from university or through other higher education, such as vocational training. I suppose in that sense, it's a reasonable number of qualified people. But when you step back and look at that 2.3 million people, you find that just 16% of them are women, just 16%.
Okay.
And slightly better in terms of the diversity, the ethnic diversity, 35% of STEM qualified people in Australia were born elsewhere. We're not sure of the figures for people with an Indigenous background in Australia, but we know that they're very low. So there are certain segments of our society that are being excluded from the STEM workforce, and women and Indigenous Australians are the most prominent of those, or the most notable of those. It's very interesting when you look at undergraduate numbers across science, technology, engineering and maths as a whole, if you include medicine as well.
Yep.
It's around 50-50 at the undergraduate level for women and for men. But by the time, as people could progress through their careers, women drop out in droves. They drop out at the end of their bachelor's degree, they drop out at the end of higher degrees, and they drop out in their early and mid-career throughout their 20s and 30s. So that by the time you reach the most senior levels of science and technology, women represent a very small percentage indeed. And that is true whether it's in academia or in the private sector.
Yeah.
There are many, many strong and very good initiatives to address this at the moment. And the reason that there's such a huge push towards addressing that and supporting a greater gender equity in STEM is that diversity, we know that diversity in any sector leads to a richness of ideas, a more creative approach, more success in terms of retention of the workforce, more success in terms of those really traditional metrics when you're looking at the private sector in particular, financial viability. This is true whether you're talking about stock exchange listed companies where those with women on the boards are 20% more, their profits margins are 20% higher than those that don't have women on boards. Or it's true when you look at, say, for example, a traditional research team. If you're looking at a lab in a university, their success rates on any measure are stronger when there is a diversity of perspectives.
Yeah.
So I guess if you think about an analogy, the idea that you might, in biology, for example, we know that if we have a population of animals and the near relatives are crossbreeding, the potential for that population to flourish declines over time and the population gets sicker and sicker. You bring in individuals from outside of that closed system and you strengthen the gene pool. And really, the same is true for the workforce. So the more perspectives we have, the greater diversity of thinking we have, the stronger our potential and our capacity and our creativity becomes. But it's also important because it is the right thing to do. And to exclude half of our potential workforce from accessing job security and stability and career progression is morally wrong, as well as a foolhardy thing to do in terms of looking towards your greater success rates.
Okay. And you mentioned some of the great initiatives currently being undertaken. What is it that Science and Technology Australia itself is doing to promote a more diverse workforce?
We have a couple of different initiatives. So Science and Technology Australia we're a peak body, so we represent associations and societies across the sciences, technology, engineering and maths. And in our role as peak body, we are creating standard diversity guidelines, policies and supporting our associations and societies to implement these guidelines. That's work that we're doing at the moment. We're also assessing the current gender equity status for our membership and would like to create, this is a reasonably new initiative for us, but we'd like to create a year-on-year reporting mechanism for that so that we hope over time will show some positive change. We've also collaborated with Professionals Australia, which represents a vast number of professionals across a range of different sectors, but including science. And we, through their annual workforce survey, are starting to incorporate, or have started in the last couple of years to incorporate metrics that show us how friendly a workplace is to female researchers. So that we can can build an evidence base about that correlates the friendliness of a workplace to female researchers, and by that I mean workplace flexibility, so maternity leave, access to childcare, their policies and practices in terms of promoting women and gender pay gap. a few other measures like that. So we can hopefully start to see improvements year on year, and where we don't see them, obviously, there's room for us to intervene and to advocate, both within the sector but also to policymakers and regulators. We also have a more direct program by the name of Superstars of STEM, and the idea of this program is to change the public idea, the public perception of what a scientist looks like. So to change the stereotype. We still know that when school children in Australia are asked to draw a scientist, they will draw an old man with white hair in a lab coat, which probably comes as no surprise given the prevalence of Albert Einstein as a figure in the public imagination. But what we're doing with Superstars is we know that in the media, like in many other sectors, that journalists will go to the same sources over and over again. So if they find a trusted source who they know is articulate, who responds in a timely fashion, who is good talent, they will keep going back to that person. And over time, this has meant that only 10 or 11% of the scientists quoted in the media, in the news media, are women. So we decided to assist women who were already doing great things in science and technology with skills development and with opportunities and with networking to introduce them directly to journalists, essentially to create those good sources and to make them easy for journalists to access, so that it becomes the easy thing for the news media to call on these women as a first thing rather than as a second or third try. And, we're doing it over about a year for the program. We've got 30 women from around Australia. They're from a range of different scientific disciplines. They're from early career through to the very senior levels. They're from the private sector, the public sector, the academic sector. They have a range of other diversity sort of criteria wrapped into the program. There's ethnic diversity. There are some members of the LGBTIQ community. And over a year, we are giving them really comprehensive training in communications. We've set them up with excellent mentors. Yep. We're giving them opportunities to use their new skills and introducing them directly to the people who can help them to do that. So we are already starting to see some significant improvements in the visibility of women of science as a result of that program. And we're almost sort of through to the end of the first year. We're about to, in the middle of this year, we'll be opening up applications for the second round. And we'll be doing that for a minimum of 5 years in total, and hopefully beyond that as well.
Yeah, it sounds like a wonderful start, at least, a wonderful program.
Yeah, look, it's going pretty well, and we're hoping that over time we just sort of create this groundswell, this vast resource really for the country of 150 or more women who are articulate and skilled and willing and interested in being people who bring science to the public and being role models for girls and young women.
Mm-hmm. In that same submission that I mentioned earlier, the 2030 strategic plan, STA noted it is pleased with an acknowledgement that government has a key role to play in creating the regulatory and cultural framework in which science and technology can be supported to flourish. Could you describe, Kylie, how that governmental role should best be carried out?
Sure. So government sets the tone. They create the cultural imperative for change to happen. So, for example, when the Australian government a couple of years ago said we are prioritising academic private sector collaboration in science and technology, and we are prioritising commercialisation of science, there was a great flurry of activity throughout not just the sector but also the private sector to work out how that could best be enacted, because people and organisations want to be on the right side of government. So if government takes a holistic approach to planning for science and technology, if it takes a holistic and strategic approach to investing in science and technology, and if it takes a long-term approach to investing and planning for these things, then it creates an expectation that and an assumption that science is highly valued, that it is worthwhile investing in, that the investment in science for the longer term necessarily leads to improvements in our health, in our economic strength, in our well-being, and in our environmental management, in our resilience as a nation. If government sets that expectation and plans accordingly, and as I say, if it takes that holistic approach, so if it connects up its different departments, currently we have, I think, around 17 departments and agencies that have, or government bodies that have responsibility for expenditure of the science budget. If there's an expectation from leadership in government that those bodies will collaborate, will work together, will not work at cross purposes, will not sort of squabble for resources, but will strategically invest for a shared future, then the rest will follow. The sector will follow, and the community will follow.
Yeah, that's the idea, isn't it?
Look, you've got to aim high, haven't you, Jan? We're always optimistic.
On a slightly more pessimistic note, the results of a recent report released by the Australian Research Alliance for Children and Youth led to a colleague of yours, Professor Emma Johnston, who is the president of Science and Technology Australia, to voice concerns on the falling proficiency rates of maths and science in Australian students. What, in your opinion, is at the root of these problems in STEM education?
Look, if I had a simple answer to that, then I'd probably be boss of the world. But there are a few things that are pretty obvious in Australia in particular. One of them is that we have a number of teachers who are teaching out of area in secondary schools. So people who are not qualified in maths or science are teaching maths and science. And, that means that they're not equipped to teach it as well as it can be taught. There's a measure of fear, perhaps, and insecurity, and that obviously is conveyed to the students. That means it's incumbent on us as a society. I'm not trying to blame teachers by any means. It's incumbent on us as a society to support teachers to do their job in their best possible fashion. So to increase the number of people who are qualified properly to teach science, technology, engineering and maths, and to support them to do so. So there are, to create incentives perhaps for people who have qualifications in those areas to add to their qualifications with education training and to go into teaching or consider a career in teaching. In primary school, obviously, there are even fewer people who have qualifications or confidence in science and maths. I think around 95% of Australian primary school teachers do not have qualifications in maths and science, and many of them do not feel adequately supported or equipped to teach those well. So it's up to us to better support our teachers and to create a system that encourages people and values education as a career. We also have a national curriculum, but it is inconsistently applied because education is the responsibility of each state. And so there are varying requirements from state to state in terms of the material that's being taught and the way in which it's taught. At the same time, and this is probably a little bit of a higher level impact factor, some years ago universities removed maths as a prerequisite for a number of the degrees which have maths as relevant. And so there's a bit of discussion going on at the moment about whether maths should be reintroduced as a prerequisite to create an incentive for students to continue to study it at a higher level in year 11 and 12.
Yep. So just finally, are there international trends in science and technology where there is an opportunity for Australia to take the lead on?
Yeah, absolutely. We already lead in a few areas, but I think the big areas of potential for us in the near future are quantum computing. Our current Australian of the Year is a quantum physicist. She is breaking new ground globally in creating quantum computers. That's going to be a total game changer in many, many different fields because it will enable us to exponentially increase computing power. Australia also has a very strong record in medicine and biotechnology, and we continue to grow our strength and our contributions in that area. That's, with the new era of gene editing and personalised medicine just starting to come in, I think there's enormous potential there as well. We've just had this in the last 6 months, bilateral support for a new space science capacity in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Both the government and the opposition have named it as a priority and announced that there will be an Australian Space Agency established. And of course, that opens up all kinds of opportunities for big data. We're building our part of the world's biggest telescope, the Square Kilometre Array. That, again, the amount of data that is possible to collect and the work that can be done with that via the advances in quantum computing are just mind-blowing.
Mm-hmm.
It has implications, of course, for agriculture and primary industries, for extreme weather prediction and disaster risk reduction and resilience. It has implications for the mining sector, for food and water security, for climate science, obviously, and all of these are areas where Australia has some very strong track records and strong potential to grow. The last one I'd suggest is energy. Given our unique geographic position and the size of our country and the sparseness of our population, energy, and the fact that we are a developed nation, energy is an area where we have both the incentive and imperative to innovate, but we've also got the equipment, the tools and the brain power to innovate. So I think that's one where we will continue to be a world leader. Climate science, likewise, our location on the globe makes Australia ideal to be a leader in climate science. Our proximity to Antarctica, and our location in the middle of several oceans, and the clear skies that we have, and our ability to collect really good satellite data as well. So I think there's a lot to be optimistic about. There's a lot of exciting science being done, and I think in a number of those different areas we are on the brink of generational shifts in understanding and in potential and in the kinds of technology that might be developed as a result of that new knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Great. It sounds like we're a lucky country in many ways, and it's time to take advantage of that.
Absolutely agree. And I think we do have the potential to do that. So we'll continue to work with our members in the sector and with the government, of course, as well, to make sure that we are poised to take the best advantage of that potential.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you very much for your work in promoting STEM in Australia, Kylie, and thank you very much for taking the time to speak to me today.
It's been a pleasure, Jan. Thank you.
Thank you. That was Kylie Walker, CEO of Science and Technology Australia. And that's all the strife we have time for today. This episode's music comes from Tetrahedra and their song called Klein. They make AV creations, so it's worth checking out their visual EP, Soma, to get the full experience. Thanks to them, and thanks to you for listening. Goodbye.
Honestly, given the chance again, I'd stay more in between you and he, more fearlessly, understand the impacts yet to be. How do we get back? How do we get back? How do we get back? Yes, I never had a chance. I cannot take that, but I cannot look back. The only stops us from seeing what's ahead. Every time I think about the future, it looks bright. Every time we give up on our anger, we make light. Every time I think about the future, it looks bright. How do we get back? Now we can say that again. The loss is not our cross to bear. Every time I think about the future, it looks bright. can I stay more in between? I don't want to carry with me burden on my life. I don't want to feel you feeling worthless, never fine. Every time I think about the future, it looks bright. Every time I think about the future, 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 the future.